Hello and welcome to this Come to Jesus Daily devotional, and today we continue in our God's Vision for the Church series, and today we consider more about the kind of church that Jesus is building. Let's read from Matthew 16 verse 18. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Simply today I want to ask what Jesus meant by I will build my church, so as to play our part in this vital vision that, as we see, Satan wants to distract us from. Now, there are many views of the church. The church is seen often as an institution. It's seen as that building on the hill with the graveyard. It's seen as a small group that must only meet in a home. It's seen as believers gathering together for something that looks like a rock concert, but without any need for deep relationships and faithfulness. In order to be involved in building the church, today we want to briefly look at a few important truths that paint a picture of God's vision for the church. Firstly, the church is God's community that are called out and called together. The word church or ecclesia in our text means an assembly of people who have been called out, summoned together for a purpose. As Israel had been called out of the nations to be God's chosen people, his holy people, so now the church are God's called out ones. So firstly, to build the church is to build a community that's called out and called together, called out of the world to belong to God in holiness, and called together for worship, loving relationships, and God's mission to make disciples. So firstly, the church is God's community that are called out and called together. Secondly, the church is universal and local. Those two ideas. The church consists of all believers throughout all of history, those on the earth now and those in heaven. This is the universal church, and the church is also local. Local communities of believers who meet together to break bread, to baptize, to learn together, to be in deep relationships and support each other. So the church is universal, but that universal church needs to become and lived out in local churches. The church, thirdly, is visible and invisible. It's vital to understand that the universal and local church consists of the invisible and visible church. The visible church are all who claim to belong to Jesus. These are external Christians. They look like Christians. They look like they're living for Jesus. But the invisible church is those whom God sees as truly belonging to him. And this is why we read in the parable of the wheat and the tares, or the wheat and the weeds, from Matthew 13, 24 to 30, that there are wheat and weeds within the church. There's the visible, therefore, and the invisible church. So in response, God's vision for the church he's building is of, firstly, his ecclesia, communities that are called out of the world and that he's called to belong to him. His vision is that we are fully devoted to him, having left the world behind us and being fully devoted to one another, called out and called to belong to God and to belong to one another. That's firstly his ecclesia that he's building. Secondly, God's vision for his church is communities of people who love the universal church whilst being devoted to a local church family that's led by a body of shepherds or elders. We must beware of the super spiritual excuse of loving all Christians so much that we can't love anyone very much. Thirdly, God's vision for his church is of communities that understand that even within our own church or church family is contained the visible and invisible church. There are wheat and weeds. We must strive to build, but will never have a totally perfect church. Men and women will sin and fall away, even leaders. We must not become cynical, but must remain loving and faithful. God bless you.